Hello and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Ashleigh Early.
And I'm Kasey Jones.
Today we're going to talk about part 2 of what we started last week. Last week we talked about how to call someone out. This week we're going to talk about what to do if you yourself are called out. Because this is an important thing, and as allies, as peoples, as salespersons, we have to accept that we are going to screw things up occasionally and get called out. And I'm going to start with a very silly version of this. Because it came up last night. My husband and I went out for pizza, as we do every Friday. It's become a thing. It's the one time we leave our house each week, and we get a slice of pizza from the pizzeria around the corner. And the woman ahead of us in line was just rude, horribly rude. Like, she actually was snapping her fingers to get people's attention rude. And it made me laugh because it reminded me of when I was, I don't know, like 13, and I was on this choir trip, and we were in Europe. It was my first time in Europe, and I don't remember where we were, but it was me and a group of other kids, like other 13-year-olds, and our chaperone. And this waiter was not paying attention to us, and we really had to go because we had to be back at the bus by a certain time. And we were all getting slightly frustrated, and I somehow ended up snapping at the waiter, like full on with my fingers. I got shamed so hard by everyone in that group that to this day, I am terrified of getting waiters' attentions. Like, it actually makes me uncomfortable. If you go out to a meal with me, I will frequently, like, the most I'll do is like a little shorthanded way where I'm like kind of slowly raising my hand to the height of my shoulder, because I got called out hard and was made very clear that was not acceptable. I didn't do it maliciously. I was 13 and I didn't know better. But what happened was I listened, I learned very quickly, very strongly, probably made me a little overly afraid, but I grew. And there have been a bunch of other points in my career where I've been called out. I've been called out for talking too much in meetings. I've been called out for, I can name some things that were not exactly safe for the podcast that I've been called out for, but things happen and you have to learn. So at some point, if it hasn't happened already, and if you've been in sales for more than a year and a half, it's probably happened to you. And if you've been in sales more than a year and a half and you think it hasn't happened to you, you probably missed it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what to do if you get called out. And rule number 1 is listen. If somebody's telling you that you did something that they felt was wrong or inappropriate or harmful to your career or just could have been done better, whether it's in person or online, your first reaction needs to be listen. 2 ears, 1 mouth. Hard to do.
And look, your instinct often is going to be to immediately defend yourself.
Yep.
But the key is to listen and also to encourage them to continue talking. Like, be really curious, because there's something you can learn here. Even if they're wrong, there's likely something about how you presented something or how you engaged that if you pay attention, you can make some adjustments to have bigger results. And so one of the things that, Ashleigh and I were just talking about is some of the ways that you can be curious and encourage people to kind of inform you a little bit more. One big thing is really avoid asking why questions and ask a lot of what questions. And so when I say what questions, I mean, like, what about what I did made you feel that way? Or what could I have done differently to give you a different impression or to give you a better impression? Or what makes you say that? People will get very specific when you ask those what questions, and you're going to get a much better kind of learning around the message that they're trying to give you.
And I'll say this too, you will get called out for things wrongly. It happens. I got called out once because somebody heard a snippet of a conversation I had with someone on my team where I asked them to grab me lunch because I was going to work through lunch. They were going out. They offered to buy me lunch. I said, please do let me know how much. I'll Venmo you the difference. They didn't hear me say, I'll Venmo you. They heard me say, please expense it. It was just a clear misunderstanding. When they approached me with it, I got hyper defensive because I felt like that was an affront to my character. In hindsight, I would have done much better asking, what did you hear? What made you approach me about this? What are your concerns about the situation? What can I do to assuage your fears that I took advantage of that? In the future, would it be more helpful if I used cash or something like that so you could see that I'm paying for things or whatever? Or would you prefer I just didn't do this at all? At no point in that sort of line of questioning am I defensive or am I telling them, no, that's not what happened, you misheard, even though they did.
Yeah, and look, I think here's the thing. We live in a culture, especially anyone who's listening that's in the United States, we live in a culture where kind of assuming the worst of someone and running with that assumption and being willing to kind of argue with them is now common.
Sadly.
It's sort of how we operate. It is literally the reason why I stopped listening to the news and political podcasts, and I read a little bit to stay up to date, but that's it, because I realized that when I was listening to like 15 hours of political podcasts every week, I assumed, I gave no one the benefit of the doubt, and I always assumed the worst about people. And so we're in this position where we are much closer to our knee-jerk reactions and assuming the worst of people. And it is not helping us learn. It's not helping us, compromise on conflict. It's not helping us understand or create value or build relationships. It just does not help. And so anything you can do to slow down and come from a place of curiosity and learning, it's going to serve you much better. And I know that the instinct is to not do that.
This is a hard thing to do, but I compare this to the rule I tell people: if you're ever being fired or let go from a company, never sign anything in the room. Always get it reviewed by a lawyer. Always talk to your friends afterwards. No matter what they say, don't sign it in the room. Because if they're trying to force you to sign it in the room, it's in their best interest, not in yours. The same thing applies here. Nothing good comes from you telling them, from you having that reaction in the moment. The best thing you can do is ask those what questions. Don't editorialize, don't give context, just ask some questions. And then at the end say, thank you for coming to me with this. I appreciate the trust. Are you okay if I take some time and think about our conversation and then come back to you with what I think I've learned and what I'd like to do going forward? Ask for that time to go sit and think about it. It's not just important for you, it's important for them.
Yeah.
They need to get away from it. Now, the follow-up to that is you do actually have to circle back. Because I've had that happen before where I gave feedback to somebody, said, great, let me think about it. And 6 months later, I hadn't heard anything and nothing had changed. So it was like, oh, thanks for blowing me off.
Yeah. And look, I think it's also during that time, that's also when, you want to think about it, but that's also when you can get some feedback. Because sometimes someone will say something to you and you really aren't sure who's in the right.
Yep.
And where the line of kind of your intentions and their perception intersects. And so it can be really helpful. And frankly, I think especially, I only know this from a gendered perspective. I don't know if this is true also for minorities, but I know as a woman, oftentimes, especially when I was younger, my instinct would be to assume that when someone gave me really negative feedback about something that they were right and I really screwed up.
Yep.
And it wouldn't be until I talked to other people that I trusted or other women that they'd be like, oh no, that's not right. And the story I told on our last episode about calling someone out, there's somebody that doesn't like me. And when I talked to a mentor of mine about that, and she was like, oh, no, it's a badge of honor that he doesn't like you. He doesn't like any strong women. And I was like, oh, okay. I feel better about it, And so sometimes having that like conversation of,
was I in the wrong here?
And what parts were in the wrong and what parts weren't, because it's usually a muddled thing. It's usually not black and white.
Yeah. So like, for example, my example with the buying the lunch thing, what was in the wrong there was probably how overt I was about it. I didn't think it would be a big deal. So I probably should have been a little bit more quiet about it. Or B, cash. If there's cash involved, it's really clean. they can't really do anything about it, and there's nothing to be had there. So it's like, okay, lesson learned, do that from now on. Next, no big deal. But I think there's one last bit here that I want to make sure we call out is if you do something that is wrong, and I think this even happens to us, Kasey. I think we've even had to do this with the podcast.
Without a doubt.
We've been called out on several things.
Yeah.
And when we are wrong, we come on and we say, we were wrong.
Yeah.
Here's what we've learned, and here's what we're going to do otherwise. Because it's not just about, in many cases, especially if it is not a specific instance, but a behavior that's repeated.
Yeah.
It's important to be stating these things publicly, whether it's to the team that you're managing, or your company, or to your listeners, or on LinkedIn, whatever. It's important to take that step, to be willing to be public and say, I was wrong about this. I've learned. And I mean, we've seen people do this on LinkedIn around the Black Lives Matter movement. I can think of a few people who've said, I've changed my mind on this after getting more information.
Yeah.
People called me out, and I'm stepping up here to say I was wrong.
Yeah. And this is how we learn, and this is how we kind of grow as an industry, as a people, as a country, as a whatever.
And it's how you inspire other people to grow. Showing change makes it so much easier for other people to make that jump and feel like, oh, well, if they adjusted, well, I should probably adjust too.
Yeah.
That's incredibly powerful.
Yeah. No. And so I think that's the big thing is like, look, getting it wrong isn't the end of the world. We all do it. And no, I won't say it's the end of the world, but the real mistake is when you get it wrong and you don't fix it.
Yes. Or you try and sweep it under the rug.
Yeah. Or you dig in your heels, even though that like voice in the back of your mind or that little thing in your gut knows that you're wrong. Like, no. Own it. It's okay. I promise, like facing it head on and fixing it is going to feel way better than doubling down on a decision or behavior that you know in your gut just ain't right.
And I promise we are not talking about anything political at this moment. Although I just made it. But this is the fact of the matter is when you get called out, that this is a learning experience, and this is a good thing. A good leader should get called out.
Yeah.
Fairly regularly. Just like on the last episode, we said, if you're an SDR, you should be pissing someone off once a month. If you're a good leader, you should be getting called out at least once a year for something that you can do better. Hey, this had this reaction. This did this. Because that's how we grow. It's not just by the challenges, it's other people holding us accountable.
And probably more than once a year. If no one ever calls you out, it means that you haven't created a safe environment where people can be honest with you.
100%.
And that is a failure in and of itself. And I would look to address that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
All right. So thank you for listening. Again, if you've got stories about this, if you want to share, come find us on social. Also, if you want to write a blog post about this, we would love to hear it. Send us an email at hello@othersideofsales.com. And make sure also to go to the website and sign up to get the State of Sales survey, which by the time this airs
I think we'll be live.
Yeah. There's some really, really fascinating information, and it's just the beginning of what we're doing here. But I think you're all going to find it compelling and interesting and motivating. And we'd love for you to check it out and give us some feedback on how you think. What do you think about it?
We want to hear everything. We want all the call outs.
Yes.
Good and bad.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Other Side of Sales, and we will see you and talk at you in a week.